The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Riverside Community College as students shuffled into room 204 for their Monday music appreciation class. Among them was a young woman in her early 20s, carrying a faded backpack and wearing simple jeans with a plain sweater. Her name was Lisa, and she moved quietly through the crowded hallway, careful not to bump into the groups of chattering students who seemed to know each other well. This was only her third week at the college, and she still felt like an outsider. Most of the other students were fresh out of high school, excited about their first taste of college life. Lisa was different. She had taken a few years off after finishing school, and now at 23 she was finally here trying to get her degree. Nobody asked why she had waited so long, and she preferred it that way. She slipped into a seat near the back of the classroom, the kind of spot where you could observe everything without being noticed. The room had that typical college smell of old textbooks and floor polish. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and someone had left a half-empty coffee cup on one of the desks. In the corner, almost forgotten, sat an upright piano. Its dark wood was covered with a thin layer of dust, and some of the keys had yellowed with age. It looked like nobody had touched it in months. Professor Harrison entered the room exactly at 9 o'clock, carrying a leather briefcase that had seen better days. He was in his mid-50s with graying hair and glasses that constantly slipped down his nose. He had been teaching at Riverside for over 20 years, and it showed in the way he moved through his routine with practiced efficiency. He barely looked at the students as he set down his briefcase and pulled out his lecture notes. "Good morning, everyone," he said, his voice carrying that tone of someone who had said the same words 1,000 times before. A few students mumbled responses while others were still texting on their phones. The teaching assistant, a graduate student named Ryan, stood off to the side organizing papers. He was younger than the professor, probably in his late 20s, with the eager energy of someone who still found teaching exciting. He smiled at students as they came in, trying to remember all their names even though it was still early in the semester. Professor Harrison launched into his lecture about the Romantic period in classical music. He talked about Chopin and Liszt, about how the piano had become the instrument of choice for composers who wanted to express deep emotions. Most students scribbled notes dutifully, though Lisa noticed a few playing games on their laptops behind half-closed screens. Lisa listened carefully, her pen moving across her notebook. Every now and then, when the professor mentioned a particular piece or composer, something flickered in her eyes. A kind of recognition, perhaps, or memory, but she kept her expression neutral, her posture relaxed and unremarkable. Halfway through the class, Professor Harrison stopped his lecture and made an announcement that caused several students to sit up straighter in their seats. "I want to remind you all about your midterm project," he said, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Each of you will need to perform a simple piece on the keyboard. Nothing complicated. Just something to show that you've engaged with the material we've been covering." A wave of groans rippled through the classroom. One student raised his hand immediately. "Professor, I've never played piano before." "Like, at all." Harrison waved his hand dismissively. "That's perfectly fine. This is music appreciation, not performance class. I'm not expecting a concert. Play some simple scales. Play Mary Had a Little Lamb if you want. The point is to physically interact with an instrument and understand what goes into creating music. Even something basic will give you more appreciation for what professional musicians do." Another student, a girl with bright purple hair, looked worried. "How long does it have to be?" 30 seconds minimum, Harrison replied. 1 minute maximum. "Really, people, this is not meant to be stressful. Just pick something within your comfort zone and do your best. You'll sign up for practice room time over the next few weeks. Ryan will pass around a sheet." Ryan began walking around the room with a clipboard, and students started signing up for slots to use the practice rooms. Some were joking about it, making light of their lack of musical ability. Others looked genuinely nervous, already imagining themselves fumbling through chopsticks in front of their classmates. When Ryan reached Lisa's row, she glanced at the sign-up sheet but didn't write her name down. She just passed it to the next student. Ryan noticed this but didn't say anything. He made a mental note to check with her later. The class continued with more lecture content, and eventually, the hour and 15 minutes came to an end. Students packed up their belongings with the usual rustle of papers and zipping of backpacks. Lisa was one of the first to stand, slinging her worn backpack over her shoulder. As she headed toward the door, Ryan called out, "Hey, excuse me, Lisa, right? She turned, looking slightly surprised that he knew her name. Yes? I noticed you didn't sign up for practice room time, he said, approaching her with his friendly, concerned expression. Do you already know which slot you want? I can add you to the list. Lisa smiled politely. Oh, I'll figure it out. Thanks, though. Are you sure? The good times fill up fast. You don't want to end up practicing at 7 in the morning or 10 at night. I appreciate it, really. I'll be okay. Ryan nodded, though he looked unconvinced. As Lisa walked out of the classroom, he watched her go with a slight frown. Something about her response seemed off, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Maybe she was just shy. A lot of adult students felt self-conscious about being older than their classmates. Over the next few days, Ryan kept an eye on the practice room sign-up sheet. Lisa's name never appeared. He saw her in class twice more that week, always sitting in the same back corner, always taking notes quietly, never raising her hand or participating in discussions. She seemed pleasant enough when spoken to, but she maintained a careful distance from everyone around her. On Friday after class, Ryan mentioned it to Professor Harrison while they were packing up. That student, Lisa Chen, the one who sits in the back, she still hasn't signed up for practice time. Harrison looked up from his briefcase. Which one is that? Early 20s, usually wears a gray or black sweater, sits in the back left corner. Oh, right. The quiet one. Harrison shrugged. Some students wait until the last minute. She'll sign up eventually. I tried to talk to her about it, but she kind of brushed me off. I'm wondering if maybe she's anxious about performing. You know how some people get really nervous about playing in front of others? Harrison considered this for a moment. Well, we can't make exceptions. Everyone has to do the assignment. If she's struggling with anxiety about it, she can come talk to me during office hours. But the performance is mandatory. I know, I just thought maybe we should check in with her. She might need some encouragement or extra help. That's thoughtful of you, Ryan. Why don't you try to catch her after class on Monday? See if you can figure out what's going on. If she needs accommodations for anxiety or something similar, we can work with her. But she needs to communicate with us. Ryan agreed, making a mental note to talk to Lisa first thing Monday morning. He assumed she was probably one of those students who got overwhelmed by performance anxiety, and he felt genuinely concerned for her. He had seen plenty of students freeze up during presentations over the years, and he didn't want Lisa to be set up for failure. What neither Ryan nor Professor Harrison could possibly know was that their assumptions about Lisa were completely, utterly wrong. As Lisa walked across campus that Friday afternoon, earbuds in her ears, she wasn't listening to pop music or podcasts like most students. She was listening to Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, one of the most technically demanding pieces ever written. And as she listened, her fingers moved unconsciously at her sides, playing through the passages from memory, each note as familiar to her as breathing. Monday morning came with gray clouds hanging low over the campus. Ryan arrived at the classroom 15 minutes early, determined to talk with Lisa before class started. He had spent the weekend thinking about how to approach the conversation without making her feel singled out or embarrassed. He knew that adult students sometimes struggled with feeling out of place, and the last thing he wanted was to make things worse. Students began trickling in around 10 minutes before class. Ryan watched the door carefully, waiting for Lisa to arrive. She came in with about 5 minutes to spare, heading straight for her usual seat in the back corner. Ryan quickly made his way over to her before she could get too settled. Hey, Lisa, do you have a second? He asked, keeping his voice low so other students wouldn't overhear. She looked up from her notebook, her expression friendly but guarded. Sure, what's up? Ryan pulled over a nearby chair and sat down, trying to seem casual. I wanted to check in with you about the midterm performance. I noticed you still haven't signed up for practice room time, and we're already 2 weeks away from the due date. Right, Lisa said simply, not offering any further explanation. Ryan shifted in his chair, choosing his words carefully. Look, I know performing in front of people can be really stressful. A lot of students feel anxious about it, especially if they haven't had much experience with music. There's nothing wrong with that, but we want to make sure you have the support you need. I appreciate your concern, Lisa replied, her tone polite but distant. But I'll be fine, really. Are you planning to practice at home then? Do you have access to a keyboard or piano? I'll figure something out, she said with a small smile. You don't need to worry about me. Ryan nodded slowly, but his concern was growing rather than diminishing. Her responses were just vague enough to avoid giving any real information. In his experience, this usually meant a student was either in denial about a problem or too embarrassed to ask for help. "Okay," he said finally. "But if you change your mind or need anything, my office hours are posted on the syllabus. Don't hesitate to reach out." "Thanks, Ryan, I will." As he walked back to the front of the room, Ryan felt more worried than before. Something wasn't adding up, but he couldn't force Lisa to accept help if she didn't want it. Class started, and Professor Harrison dove into a lecture about the technical demands of piano composition during the Romantic era. He showed videos of professional pianists performing complex pieces, their fingers flying across the keys in ways that seemed almost superhuman. "Notice the polyrhythmic patterns here," Harrison said, pausing a video of someone playing a Chopin piece. "The left hand is playing in one rhythm while the right hand plays in another. It takes years of training to coordinate this kind of movement." Some students looked impressed. Others looked relieved that they would only have to play something simple. Lisa watched the video with an expression that Ryan couldn't quite read. Was that anxiety? Fascination? He couldn't tell. After class, Ryan caught up with Professor Harrison in his office. The small room was cluttered with stacks of sheet music, old textbooks, and coffee mugs in various stages of being forgotten. Harrison was at his desk entering grades into his laptop. "I talked to Lisa Chen this morning," Ryan said, closing the door behind him. "About the performance assignment." Harrison looked up over his reading glasses. "And? She's still being evasive about it. She hasn't signed up for practice time, and when I asked her about it, she just kept saying she'd be fine. But honestly, I don't think she will be. I'm getting the sense that she's really anxious about this whole thing and maybe doesn't want to admit it." Harrison leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. "Did she say she was anxious?" "Not in so many words. But she's avoiding the practice rooms, avoiding any concrete discussion about preparation. Classic avoidance behavior." Harrison drummed his fingers on the desk. "What do you think we should do?" Ryan had been thinking about this all morning. "I know this might sound harsh, but maybe we need to push her a little. Sometimes students need to be challenged to get past their fears. If we let her keep avoiding it, she might just not show up on performance day and then she fails the assignment." "You're suggesting we force the issue somehow?" "Not force exactly, but maybe assign her something specific? Give her a concrete goal to work toward instead of letting her float in this vague space where she can keep putting it off." Harrison considered this for a long moment. He had been teaching long enough to recognize avoidance patterns in students. Some people needed a firm push to break through their own resistance. On the other hand, he had also seen students who genuinely struggled with performance anxiety, and pushing them too hard could backfire. "What kind of specific goal did you have in mind?" he asked. Ryan hadn't thought that far ahead. "I don't know. Maybe assign her a particular piece? Something appropriate for a beginner but substantial enough that she has to actually practice it?" Harrison's eyes drifted to a stack of sheet music on his desk. He picked up a book and flipped through it thoughtfully. A strange expression crossed his face, something between amusement and calculation. "You know what?" he said slowly. "I've been thinking about this assignment anyway. Maybe it's too easy. These students aren't being challenged enough. They're all just going to play Twinkle Twinkle and call it a day." Ryan felt a flutter of unease. He knew that tone. It was the voice Harrison used when he was about to make a controversial teaching decision, the kind that made sense in his head, but sometimes went sideways in practice. "What are you thinking?" Ryan asked cautiously. "What if we raise the bar a little? Not for everyone, of course, but for a student who seems to be coasting, who isn't taking the assignment seriously. Sometimes people need to be pushed out of their comfort zone to discover what they're capable of." "Professor, I'm not sure that's a good idea. If Lisa is already anxious, making the assignment harder could really backfire." Harrison waved his hand dismissively. "Anxiety comes from uncertainty. If we give her a specific piece to learn, a clear goal, that might actually help. She'll know exactly what's expected instead of worrying about vague requirements." "But what piece are you thinking of assigning her?" Harrison pulled out a piece of sheet music and held it up. Ryan's eyes widened when he saw the title. It was Chopin's Fantaisie Impromptu, one of the most technically difficult pieces in the classical piano repertoire. Even advanced pianists spent months or years perfecting it. "You can't be serious," Ryan said. "That's way too hard. That's not pushing someone, that's setting them up to fail." "I'm not expecting her to play it perfectly," Harrison said. The point is the effort, the attempt. She'll learn more from struggling with a difficult piece than from easily playing something simple. This is about growth. With all due respect, this seems more like punishment than education. She's going to be humiliated in front of the whole class. Harrison's expression hardened. Ryan, I've been teaching for over 20 years. Sometimes you have to make tough calls. This student is avoiding engagement with the material. She needs to be challenged, not coddled. Ryan opened his mouth to argue further, but he could see that Harrison had made up his mind. As a teaching assistant, he didn't have the authority to overrule the professor's decisions. He could only advise, and his advice was being ignored. At least let me talk to her first, Ryan said. Warn her or something? No, Harrison said firmly. If you warn her, she'll just drop the class or make up some excuse. I'll announce it in Wednesday's class. That gives her 2 full weeks to work on it. Plenty of time to make a serious attempt. Ryan left the office feeling sick to his stomach. He had seen professors make questionable decisions before, but this felt different. This felt personal and potentially cruel. He spent the rest of the day trying to convince himself that maybe Harrison was right, that maybe Lisa needed this kind of push. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was going to end badly. Wednesday's class arrived too quickly. Ryan stood at the side of the room, watching students settle into their seats. Lisa was in her usual spot, looking relaxed and completely unaware of what was about to happen. She was actually smiling at something on her phone, a rare moment of her guard being down. Professor Harrison began class with his usual announcements and then transitioned into his lecture. But about 20 minutes in, he stopped and pulled out his gradebook. Before we continue, he said, I want to make an adjustment to the performance assignment. Most of you have signed up for practice time and selected your pieces, which is good. However, I've noticed that some students aren't taking this assignment as seriously as they should. Ryan's stomach clenched. Several students exchanged confused glances. Harrison continued, I believe in challenging my students to reach beyond what they think they're capable of. So I'm going to assign a specific piece to one student, someone who I think needs that extra push to engage fully with this class. The room had gone quiet. Students were looking around, trying to figure out who he was talking about. Harrison looked directly at the back corner. Lisa, I'd like you to perform Chopin's Fantaisie Impromptu for your midterm. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Lisa's smile faded, replaced by a blank expression that was impossible to read. Students were turning in their seats to look at her, their faces showing confusion and sympathy. A student named Ben, who sat near the front, raised his hand immediately. Professor, isn't that piece really hard? Like professionally hard? It is challenging, yes, Harrison acknowledged. But I believe Lisa is capable of rising to that challenge. She has 2 weeks. I'm not expecting perfection, just a genuine effort. Another student, Katie, spoke up without raising her hand. That doesn't seem fair. The rest of us get to play easy stuff, and she has to play something that takes professional pianists years to learn. This is my decision as your instructor, Harrison said, his voice taking on an edge. Lisa will perform this piece, and I expect the rest of you to support your classmate rather than undermining the assignment. Ryan couldn't stay silent anymore. Professor, maybe we should discuss this further before. The decision is made, Ryan. Harrison cut him off. Lisa, do you have any questions about the assignment? All eyes turned to Lisa. She sat perfectly still for a moment and then slowly shook her head. No questions, she said quietly. Her voice was so calm, so controlled that it somehow made the situation feel even worse. Ryan expected her to argue, to protest, maybe even to walk out of the class. But she just sat there, her face unreadable, her hands resting calmly on her desk. The rest of the class passed in an uncomfortable fog. Students kept glancing back at Lisa, but she seemed to have retreated into herself, her expression neutral and distant. When class finally ended, several students rushed over to her, offering sympathy and outrage on her behalf. That was so unfair, Katie said. You should talk to the department head or something. He can't just single you out like that, Ben added. There's got to be some kind of rule against it. Lisa gathered her things slowly, listening to their concerns with that same calm expression. It's okay, she said simply, really. It'll be fine. As she walked out of the classroom, Ryan caught a glimpse of her face. For just a split second, he thought he saw something flash in her eyes. But it wasn't fear or anxiety like he expected. It looked almost like amusement, as if she had just heard a joke that no one else understood. Then it was gone, and she disappeared into the hallway, leaving behind a classroom full of students who thought they had just witnessed an act of academic cruelty. What none of them knew was that in her apartment that night, Lisa would sit at her digital keyboard, the one she kept carefully hidden in her closet, and play through the Fantasy Impromptu from memory. Every note, every run, every delicate phrase, perfect and effortless, just like she had played it hundreds of times before. The news spread through Riverside Community College like wildfire. By Thursday afternoon, students who weren't even in the music appreciation class had heard about what Professor Harrison had done. The story got passed around in the cafeteria, whispered about in the library, and debated in study groups across campus. Did you hear about that professor who's making some girl play an impossible piano piece? Yeah, apparently it's one of the hardest pieces ever written. She's going to be humiliated. That's messed up. Isn't there something she can do about it? The general consensus among students was that Professor Harrison had crossed a line. Some called it bullying. Others said it was just bad teaching. A few students even started talking about filing a complaint with the department, though nobody actually did it. Everyone felt bad for Lisa, this quiet student who had been singled out for reasons no one quite understood. In the music appreciation class, the atmosphere had shifted completely. When students arrived for Friday's lecture, there was tension in the air. Several classmates approached Lisa before class started, forming a protective circle around her desk. "Have you thought about dropping the class?" Katie asked, her voice full of concern. "You could take it again next semester with a different professor. Or you could talk to the dean," Ben suggested. "My roommate's girlfriend did that once when a professor was being unreasonable. They made him change the assignment. A girl named Ashley, who usually sat on the opposite side of the room, had moved closer. I looked up that piece online. It's insane. Professional concert pianists play that. There's no way he can expect you to learn it in 2 weeks." Lisa listened to all of them with a patient smile, the kind you give people when they mean well, but don't understand the full situation. "I really appreciate everyone's support," she said. "But I'm going to do the assignment. It'll be okay." "How can you be so calm about this?" Katie asked, genuinely baffled. "I'd be freaking out." "Maybe she's in shock," Ben whispered to Ashley, though not quietly enough. Lisa heard him but didn't react. She just opened her notebook and waited for class to start. The other students exchanged worried looks, convinced that she was in denial about how bad this situation was. When Professor Harrison walked in, the room fell into a cold silence. Usually there was chatter and noise before class officially started, but now everyone just stared at him with barely concealed hostility. Even students who normally liked him seemed to have turned against him overnight. Harrison noticed the atmosphere but chose to ignore it. He set down his briefcase and began his lecture on musical interpretation, seemingly oblivious to the fact that half the class wasn't paying attention. They were too busy shooting sympathetic glances at Lisa or angry looks at him. Ryan, standing at his usual spot by the door, felt caught in the middle. He had tried to talk to Harrison again after Wednesday's class, but the professor had shut down the conversation immediately. "The assignment stands," he had said. "This discussion is over." Now Ryan watched the class with growing discomfort, wondering if he should have pushed harder or gone over Harrison's head to the department chair. About halfway through the lecture, a student named David raised his hand. Harrison, probably relieved to see any sign of engagement, called on him immediately. "Yes, David?" "I have a question about the performance assignment," David said, his voice steady but challenging. "You said the point was to help us appreciate music by trying to play something simple. But assigning one person something that's basically impossible seems like it goes against that whole philosophy." Several students nodded in agreement. Harrison's jaw tightened. "That's not a question about the material," he said. "If you want to discuss grading policies, you can come to my office hours." "I'm just trying to understand the educational value," David pressed. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks more like you're setting someone up to fail." "That's enough," Harrison said sharply. "The assignment has been made and it's not up for debate. Now if we can return to the actual lesson." "It's not fair," Katie interrupted, her voice rising. "You can't just single out one person like this. If you want to challenge us, challenge all of us. Don't pick on someone just because they're quiet and won't fight back." The room erupted in supportive murmurs. Students were nodding and some even started clapping. Harrison's face was turning red, and Ryan could see that this was spiraling out of control. "That is completely inappropriate," Harrison said, his voice tight with anger. "This is not a democracy. I am the instructor, and I make the decisions about assignments. If any of you have a problem with that, you're welcome to drop the class or file a formal complaint. But I will not stand here and be lectured by students about how to do my job." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Katie looked like she wanted to say more, and several other students seemed ready to jump in. But then a quiet voice spoke up from the back corner. "It's really okay," Lisa said. Everyone turned to look at her. "I appreciate everyone defending me, but Professor Harrison gave me an assignment and I'm going to do it. That's all." Her voice was so calm, so reasonable, that it somehow diffused the situation. Students looked confused, unsure whether to keep fighting on her behalf when she seemed so accepting of the situation. Harrison seized the opportunity. "Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate your professionalism. Now can we please get back to the lesson?" The rest of the class passed in uncomfortable silence. Students took notes mechanically, but the usual energy was gone. When class finally ended, people packed up quickly, many of them still shooting dark looks at Harrison as they left. Ryan approached Lisa as she gathered her things. "Hey," he said softly. "I'm really sorry about all this. For what it's worth, I tried to talk him out of it." "I know you did," Lisa said, and her smile was genuine. "I heard you on Wednesday. Thank you for trying. I feel like I should have done more, gone to the department head or something." "It's not your job to protect me from assignments," Lisa said. "I'm an adult. I can handle it." Ryan lowered his voice even more. "Look, I know you said you'd figure it out, but if you need help, I can try to find you a piano teacher or something. Maybe someone who could at least show you the basics of the piece. I have some contacts from grad school who might be willing to do a few lessons for free." Lisa's expression softened, and for a moment, Ryan thought he saw something flicker in her eyes. Not fear or anxiety, but something else. Something almost like sadness. "That's really kind of you," she said. "But I'll manage, honestly." "How?" Ryan asked, unable to help himself. "This piece takes professional pianists months or years to learn. You have 2 weeks and you haven't even been to a practice room yet. I'm not trying to be mean, I'm just worried about you." Lisa was quiet for a long moment, and Ryan could see her choosing her words carefully. Finally, she said, "Sometimes things aren't what they appear to be, but I understand why everyone's worried, and I appreciate it. I really do." Before Ryan could respond, she walked out of the classroom, leaving him standing there feeling more confused than ever. Over the next few days, the situation became something of a campus controversy. A student posted about it on social media, and suddenly people who had never set foot in the music building had opinions about what Professor Harrison had done. Some people defended him, saying that college was supposed to challenge students and push them beyond their comfort zones. But most people thought he had gone too far. The music department started getting emails about it. Other faculty members heard the story and began asking Harrison about it in the hallway. Some were supportive, others were critical, but everyone had something to say. The department chair even called Harrison into her office for a conversation about proportional academic expectations. Harrison, stubborn as ever, refused to back down. He insisted that he was teaching an important lesson about rising to challenges and not giving up before you even tried. He claimed that Lisa would learn more from attempting this difficult piece than she ever would from playing something easy. And if she failed, well, that was a learning experience too. Meanwhile, Lisa went about her days as if nothing had changed. She attended her other classes, studied in the library, grabbed lunch at the cafeteria. A few students tried to talk to her about the situation, offering sympathy or advice, but she politely deflected all of it. She seemed remarkably unbothered by everything, which only made people more convinced that she was in some kind of denial. What nobody saw was what happened in her small apartment each evening. After finishing her homework and eating a simple dinner, Lisa would pull out her digital keyboard from the closet. It was a nice one, not top of the line but respectable, with weighted keys that felt almost like a real piano. She would set it up in her tiny living room, put on her headphones, and play. But she wasn't practicing the Fantasie Impromptu. She already knew that piece by heart. Every note, every phrase, every subtle dynamic change. Instead, she played other things. She worked through Bach preludes and fugues, her fingers moving through the complex counterpoint with ease. She played Debussy, letting the impressionistic harmonies wash over her. She played Beethoven sonatas, attacking the powerful passages with precision and emotion. These evening sessions weren't about practice. They were about memory, about reconnecting with a part of herself that she had carefully hidden away since arriving at Riverside. Each piece she played reminded her of a different time in her life. The Chopin Nocturne that she had performed at age 12 in a competition in Singapore. The Liszt Hungarian Rhapsody that had been her debut with a youth orchestra in Vienna. The Rachmaninoff Prelude that she had played for her conservatory entrance audition. She hadn't played in front of an audience in over 3 years. Not since her mother had gotten sick, and Lisa had left the conservatory to come home and help care for her. Not since she had decided that maybe being a concert pianist wasn't the life she wanted after all. Not since she had enrolled at Riverside to study music therapy instead, hoping to use music to help others heal rather than performing for applause. She had wanted to start fresh here, to be just another student, learning at her own pace without the weight of expectations and comparisons. She hadn't told anyone about her background because she didn't want special treatment or attention. She just wanted to be normal for once in her life. But now Professor Harrison had forced her hand. In 2 weeks, she would have to perform in front of the class, and when she did, everything would change. Her secret would be out and she could never put it back. Part of her was angry about that, about having her choice taken away. But another part of her, the part that still loved performing despite everything, felt a small thrill of anticipation. As the days counted down to the performance, the tension on campus only grew. Students made plans to attend the class even if they weren't enrolled in it. Some wanted to support Lisa. Others, more morbidly, wanted to witness what they thought would be a disaster. The practice room sign-up sheet became irrelevant as everyone prepared their simple pieces at home. But all anyone could talk about was Lisa and the impossible task she had been given. Ryan lost sleep over it. He had nightmares about Lisa freezing up at the piano, unable to play a single note while the class watched in painful silence. He imagined her running out of the room in tears, traumatized by the experience. He thought about all the ways he could have prevented this and felt guilty for not doing more. Professor Harrison, meanwhile, seemed satisfied with himself. He told colleagues that this would be a valuable teaching moment for everyone involved. Even if Lisa couldn't play the piece well, the attempt would demonstrate the dedication and skill required for serious musicianship. And who knows, maybe she would surprise everyone with what she could accomplish in 2 weeks. Neither of them had any idea just how big that surprise would be. The morning of the performance arrived with unusually clear skies. Lisa woke up early, made herself a simple breakfast of toast and tea, and sat by her apartment window watching the sunrise. Her digital keyboard was already packed away in the closet, and she felt a strange sense of calm that she hadn't experienced in years. Today, everything would change. There was no going back now. She dressed in plain black pants and a deep blue blouse, nothing fancy or attention-grabbing. Before leaving her apartment, she spent a few minutes stretching her hands and fingers, an old ritual from her performing days. The movements came back naturally, muscle memory from countless performances in concert halls across 3 continents. Meanwhile, room 204 at Riverside Community College was filling up much earlier than usual. Students from the music appreciation class arrived 30 minutes before the scheduled start time, wanting to get good seats. But they weren't alone. Word had spread so widely that students from other classes, other departments, even a few faculty members began showing up. Katie and Ben had come together, both looking anxious. "I can't believe this is actually happening," Katie whispered. "I barely slept last night thinking about it." "Same," Ben replied. "I keep hoping she just doesn't show up. Like maybe she'll skip class and deal with the consequences later. That would be better than watching her struggle through something impossible." Ashley arrived with 3 of her friends, none of whom were in the class. "Is this where that piano thing is happening?" one of them asked. "Yeah," Ashley said. "I told them about it. I hope that's okay." They wanted to support her. More and more people squeezed into the room. Every seat was taken, and students began sitting on the floor along the walls. A few stood in the doorway, craning their necks to see. The usual classroom that held 30 students now had at least 60 people crammed into it. Ryan arrived and stopped dead in his tracks when he saw the crowd. "What is going on?" he muttered to himself. He had expected the regular class, maybe a few extra people, but this was unprecedented. He tried to do a quick head count and gave up. There were simply too many people. Professor Harrison arrived right at 9 o'clock and seemed equally surprised by the turnout. His eyes widened behind his glasses as he took in the packed room. For a moment he looked uncertain, but then his expression hardened into determination. He had committed to this decision and he wasn't going to back down now regardless of the audience. "This is highly irregular," he announced. "Those of you who aren't enrolled in this class need to leave. This is a closed classroom session." Nobody moved. Students looked at each other, but no one stood up to go. "I'm serious," Harrison said, his voice rising. "If you're not on my roster, you need to exit now." A student near the back spoke up. "We're just here to support Lisa, Professor. We'll be quiet. We won't disrupt anything." "Yeah," another voice added. "We just want to watch the performances." Harrison looked like he wanted to argue, but Ryan leaned over and whispered something to him. Harrison's jaw clenched, but he finally nodded. "Fine. But if there are any disruptions, everyone who isn't enrolled leaves immediately." "Understood?" There were murmurs of agreement throughout the room. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation and tension. Some students had their phones out, ready to record, though Ryan quickly announced that recording was not allowed per college policy. The performances began. First up was David, who played a simple version of Heart and Soul. His fingers fumbled on a few notes and he laughed nervously when he finished. The room gave him encouraging applause. Then came a girl named Michelle who played a slow, careful rendition of Ode to Joy. She got through it without mistakes, and people clapped warmly. One by one, students went up to the old upright piano in the corner. Some played nursery rhymes. Others did simple scales or chord progressions. A few attempted easy pop songs they had learned from YouTube tutorials. Each performance lasted between 30 seconds and a minute, just as Harrison had specified. The playing was rough and amateurish, but that was expected. This was music appreciation, not performance class. The energy in the room was polite but distracted. Everyone was waiting for one name. After each student finished, people would glance at the door, wondering if Lisa had decided not to come. Maybe she had dropped the class. Maybe she was hiding somewhere on campus, too terrified to face this moment. Katie performed a shaky version of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star and practically ran back to her seat, her face flushed with embarrassment. Ben followed with a basic C major scale that he played excruciatingly slowly, counting each note under his breath. Ashley attempted Happy Birthday but got confused halfway through and had to start over. As more students performed, the tension kept building. There were only a few names left on Harrison's list. Ryan checked his watch nervously. Class was supposed to end at 10:15, and it was already past 9:45. Where was Lisa? Harrison called the next name. Then the next. The piano in the corner seemed to loom larger in everyone's consciousness, waiting. The room had grown quieter with each performance, the applause becoming more perfunctory as everyone's attention focused on the one person who hadn't gone yet. Finally, there was only one name left on the list. "Lisa Chen," Professor Harrison called out, his voice carefully neutral. The room fell into complete silence. Every head turned toward the door. For a long moment, nothing happened. Students exchanged worried glances. Had she really not come? A few people started whispering, then the door opened. Ashley gasped out loud, and several people near her did the same. All around the room, the same expression appeared on face after face: shock, disbelief, confusion, awe. This wasn't someone struggling through a piece they'd barely learned. This was someone performing at a professional level. The notes poured out of the old piano in cascading waves of sound. Lisa's hands moved across the keyboard with fluid grace, making the incredibly difficult passages look effortless. The dynamic contrasts were perfect. The soft sections were delicate and lyrical. The powerful sections rang out with confidence and emotion. Every technical challenge that made this piece famous, the rapid runs, the wide leaps, the complex rhythms, Lisa executed flawlessly. Ryan's mouth had gone completely dry. His mind was trying to process what his eyes were seeing and his ears were hearing, but it didn't make sense. This was impossible. You couldn't learn to play like this in 2 weeks. You couldn't learn to play like this in 2 years. This was the playing of someone who had been training seriously for most of their life. Professor Harrison had gone pale. The pen had fallen from his hand onto his desk, but he didn't seem to notice. He was staring at Lisa with an expression of dawning horror as he realized what he had done. what assumptions he had made, how completely wrong he had been. Students throughout the room had tears streaming down their faces, though they probably couldn't have explained why. There was something overwhelming about the moment, about watching someone reveal their true self after weeks of hiding, about the sheer beauty of the music pouring from that dusty old piano that nobody had played in months. Lisa moved through the famous middle section, where the melody becomes slower and more song-like. Her touch on the keys was sensitive and nuanced, bringing out every subtle harmony and phrase. Then she launched back into the rapid final section, her fingers blazing across the keyboard. The piece built to its dramatic conclusion. The final runs, the last powerful chords, and then silence. Lisa's hands lifted from the keys and came to rest in her lap. She sat perfectly still for a moment, her head slightly bowed as if she were coming back from somewhere far away. The silence stretched on. 3 seconds, 4, 5. Nobody in that room could move. They were frozen in disbelief, in awe, in shock. What they had just witnessed had shattered every assumption, every expectation, every belief they had held about this quiet student in the back corner. Then someone started clapping. Just one person at first, but within seconds the entire room erupted. People were on their feet, applauding wildly. Some were cheering. Others were still crying. The sound was deafening in the small classroom, bouncing off the walls and filling every corner. Lisa stood up from the piano bench and turned to face the room. Her expression was calm, perhaps slightly shy, but there was something else there too. A quiet satisfaction, a sense of relief at finally being able to stop hiding. Katie was sobbing openly, clapping so hard her hands hurt. Ben was shaking his head in amazement, a huge grin on his face. Ashley was hugging the friend next to her, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. Ryan stood frozen, his mind reeling. Teaching assistant for 3 years, and he had never seen anything like this. Had never even imagined something like this could happen. And Professor Harrison sat at his desk, his face buried in his hands, as the applause continued to thunder around him. The applause seemed to go on forever. Students were still on their feet, some wiping tears from their eyes, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The energy in room 204 had completely transformed from nervous dread to pure celebration. People who had come expecting to witness a disaster had instead experienced something they would talk about for the rest of their lives. Lisa stood quietly by the piano, accepting the applause with a slight smile. She didn't bow dramatically or soak up the attention. She just stood there, looking almost embarrassed by the reaction, her hands clasped in front of her. Slowly, the clapping began to fade. Students sat back down, but the excited whispers continued. Katie was tugging on Ben's sleeve, saying something urgent that nobody else could hear. Ashley had her phone out, typing frantically, probably telling everyone she knew what had just happened. Professor Harrison finally lifted his head from his hands. His face was ashen, and there was something broken in his expression. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. For a man who always had something to say, he seemed to have lost all his words. Ryan was the first to break the spell. He walked over to Lisa, his legs feeling strangely unsteady. "That was incredible," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't even know what to say." "That was just incredible." "Thank you," Lisa said simply, "but I don't understand. How did you—" Ryan stopped himself, realizing how the question sounded. How did you learn that in 2 weeks? But of course she hadn't learned it in 2 weeks. That much was obvious to everyone now. Other students were gathering around, all talking at once. "Where did you learn to play like that? Have you been taking lessons since you were a kid? Are you like a professional pianist or something?" Lisa held up her hands in a gentle gesture that asked for space. The crowd quieted down, everyone leaning in to hear what she would say. "I should probably explain," Lisa said, her voice carrying across the now silent room. "I didn't learn that piece in 2 weeks. I've known how to play it for a long time, since I was about 15, actually." The room buzzed with renewed whispers. 15? That was 8 years ago. "I grew up playing piano," Lisa continued. "Classical training, competitions, the whole thing. I started when I was 4 years old. My parents enrolled me in a music school in Taiwan, and when I showed some promise, they got me private teachers. Really good teachers." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "By the time I was 12, I was competing internationally. Youth competitions in Asia, Europe, a few in the United States. I won some, lost others. When I was 16, I got accepted to a conservatory in Vienna. That's where I spent 3 years training to be a concert pianist. The classroom had gone completely silent again. This quiet student who sat in the back corner and never raised her hand had a whole life that nobody knew about. A life that seemed to belong to a completely different person. "So what happened?" Katie asked softly. "Why are you here at Riverside?" Lisa's expression shifted, becoming more serious. "My mom got sick 3 years ago. Cancer. I left the conservatory to come home and help take care of her. Family comes first, you know? And during that time I started thinking about whether I really wanted to be a performer. The lifestyle, the pressure, the constant traveling. I wasn't sure anymore." She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of students who had spent 2 weeks feeling sorry for her. "My mom recovered, thankfully. She's doing well now. But I had already made my decision. I wanted to do something different with music. Something that felt more meaningful to me, so I enrolled here to study music therapy. I want to help people heal through music, not perform for applause." "But you're so talented," Ben said, almost pleading. "You could be famous. You could play in concert halls." Lisa smiled at that, a real smile that reached her eyes. "I did play in concert halls. Carnegie Hall when I was 17, as part of a Young Artist series. And you know what I learned? Being technically skilled at something doesn't mean it's your calling. I love music. I always will. But I love the idea of using it to help others more than I love performing." Ryan finally found his voice again. "Why didn't you tell anyone? Why did you let everyone think?" He stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence. "That I couldn't play," Lisa finished for him. "Because I didn't want special treatment. I didn't want to be the former prodigy or the talented one. I just wanted to be a regular student, learning about music from a different perspective. Music appreciation class was supposed to teach me about how regular people connect with music, not how to perform it." She glanced toward Professor Harrison, who was still sitting at his desk, looking smaller than he had before. "I probably should have said something when you assigned me the piece, Professor. But honestly, part of me was curious what would happen, and another part of me was a little bit angry about being singled out. I guess I wanted to prove a point." Harrison finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I owe you an apology. A serious one. I made assumptions about you based on nothing. I thought you were avoiding the assignment out of fear or laziness. I thought I was pushing you to try harder, to engage more with the class. But I was completely wrong about who you are. The classroom was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming in the vents." Harrison continued, standing up now. "There's no excuse for what I did. I singled you out, made you uncomfortable, and put you in a position where you had to reveal something you clearly wanted to keep private. That's not teaching. That's not challenging students in a healthy way. That's just poor judgment on my part, and I'm truly sorry." Lisa nodded, accepting the apology with grace. "I understand what you were trying to do. Sometimes teachers need to push students. But maybe next time, have a conversation first before making assumptions." "You're right," Harrison said. "You're absolutely right." An awkward silence followed. Nobody quite knew what to say or do next. The moment felt too big to just move on from, but class was already over time.